Hello and welcome to this edition of FOF Live presented by LaPop. That's LAPOP. You can check them out on Twitter, Instagram, and at their Doral location. Tonight is a very important series as the Marlins will be taking on the St. Louis Cardinals and what could be a potential sellers the Cardinals against the Marlins could be potential future Marlins on the Cardinals. We're looking at this series. And as always, I'm joined with Kevin Barral, Eli Sussman, and our loyal super subscriber, recurring guest, Mr. David Fernandez. David, it's great to have you on here tonight.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Can't wait to talk some fish.
Let's get things started with the series before. We could do this pretty quickly because it did not fare well for the Fish, getting swept by the Baltimore Orioles, including a game where they were up 4-0, and ultimately, nothing really happened at the end. The Orioles came back. Oscar Brazoban did not pitch well that game. Kevin, the Marlins got swept, but what were the bright spots for the Marlins, and how was this series maybe a wake-up call for the Marlins in terms of trade pieces?
So many bright spots. Not many, but there are a couple there. Obviously, we could start with Game 3. Cueto, he looked pretty good for the most part. Velo was up a little bit. I think he was hovering around 94. That's nice to see. George Soriano almost went 4 up, 4 down. Unfortunately, he couldn't, but it's fine. And then Sandy looked pretty good for the most part. Another quality outing for him. I believe he struck out 5. Really, it was just 2 bad pitches there that he gave up to Adam Frazier and Cedric Mullins. And if you want to go to and I would love to go to the negatives because Huascar Brazoban showed that maybe he's not what we thought he was at the start of the season. Maybe he's not as reliable as we expected him to be. I think it was the first pitch homer to Gunnar Henderson. I think it was on the first pitch, maybe the second, but it was not a good sight there. And then obviously he gave up the lead, and that's how Baltimore was able to take Game 2 of the series. And I think this whole series really showed that Miami needs to acquire a starting pitcher and a more high leverage reliever, or even a reliever in general. And I know Eli put out an article, and we'll talk a little bit about deadline as we approach more, to August 1st. But this series was very evident that you cannot be going out with a bullpen day every 5th day. So I think that's really what the learning spot was for the series, unlike unraveling the bright spots here, which there were a couple, but I think it was more of a learning lesson that Miami now needs to go out there and acquire a reliever outside the organization and a pitcher.
Yeah, the bright spot is that it was more competitive than the Braves series.
Yeah,
that's about all you can say, is that these games were closer, especially that middle game. That was the one where I mentioned it on the Spaces last night. That's the one that you're really kicking yourself over. This felt like a series that they should have won, salvaged something from it. The way that they played, the lead that they had in that game. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, Brazoban was kind of right in the middle of that letdown in that middle game. And I touched on it before with Dane Myers had a pretty critical misplay in center field. Unfortunately, that's another situation where fingers crossed Jazz is back by the end of the month and that he actually stays on the field this time. If not, they kind of are in trouble. That's another spot that's very questionable, at least defensively in center field. The drop-off is pretty big between Jazz and then to Dane Myers or Garrett Hampson. And those are right now their only options on the roster right now. So this was, not a cleanly played series. And even so, they had a chance to win that middle game. And I did want to, again, credit Johnny Cueto for how he did. He did the job that he was assigned to do, which was just to eat innings and to do it to save other more important guys for later games for this upcoming Cardinal series. And he did that. He went 3 scoreless innings. And David, did you get a chance to actually see him in person during his rehab? Because I was very critical of him on his way up and skeptical about what he was going to look like. And I know that you're kind of close enough to Jacksonville that maybe you got a chance to check him out while he was down there.
So I did get a chance to see him once. But a lot of his starts were coming on the road when the Jumbo Shrimp were on the road. But it wasn't pretty up here. But they said something on the broadcast while he was pitching yesterday that kind of maybe explains it a little bit. I mean, they were talking about how he just wasn't maybe getting up for the games as a major leaguer pitching in the minor leagues, having the career that he's had. So, hopefully he can do what he was supposed to do. He was getting ahead of batters yesterday, which I think is going to be key for him. But I guess we'll see. 3 innings was a good start. I think it was like in the neighborhood of 50 pitches. So I don't know if he's going to pitch again anytime soon, but at least it wasn't an abject, disaster.
And the one thing I do want to mention, I think Noah pointed out in their spaces yesterday, is that he was kind of messing with the pitch clock, and it was very evident. I mean, you kind of saw the little Cueto shake very late into the pitch clock, and it was throwing hitters off. And if that's something Cueto could really take as an advantage, and maybe this is, I guess, this is a strikeout video here, but no, it wasn't.
It's an extended highlight video because he had so many great pitches here. I just tied together some of his called strikes, and then at the end you have the lone strikeout, his only whiff of the day. Right here, that was a nice changeup that just dipped below the zone. Good for him, and we can watch it on repeat again because it was such a the high point of the series. Yeah, Cueto, he did the job he was supposed to do. You expect that now for this Cardinals series, he's going to be unavailable because of the workload that he had on Sunday. But we'll find out again during the Rockies series if another situation presents itself. I'm going to remain very skeptical of him. And we will see if they do have the good fortune of having several of their injured pitchers get healthy at the same time. Andrew already comes back, and now Edward Cabrera, we'll talk about him shortly. He's about to come back. Eventually, you hope that it's going to get pretty crowded with credible guys and that they're forced into a decision. This was really no way to hate on what Cueto did. He really helped the team out yesterday. I'll say that.
Yeah. And
I do want to ask, though. I'm sorry, Danny. I want to ask,
go ahead.
How many more of these relief appearances do you give Cueto before you say, maybe why not give him a shot? Give him one start. Give him only one start and see how he does. How many more relief appearances? It doesn't have to be mop-up innings like he did yesterday. It could be at any point in the game. How many more of those do you give him before you kind of feel like you're confident in what he's doing?
Several more. We're not close to that point yet. Yeah. Taking just one game at a time and then reconsider. But I think he's not close at this moment. I do think that it helps that it was also a shorter outing and he was able to really air it out, knowing that he didn't have to pace himself the same way that he would in a starter role. And I guess this could work out. This could be a more effective role from him, but I don't think this really tells us anything about what it would look like as a starter. I think this is totally different from that.
Yeah. And with this, we should say that the Orioles, even going into it, were the way better team. I believe they're almost all around. They're the better team against the Marlins. They're one of those teams that also looks like they need a pitcher. They just have really great young bats and are bringing up bats kind of like the Pirates almost every week. But I think the Orioles are probably a World Series type contender. But
they're the third best team in baseball. Best team in baseball. Record-wise, I shall add.
So with that series, do you guys believe maybe the Orioles just outclassed the Marlins, just completely outmatched them? Maybe, they're both 10 games over 500, but the Orioles are just that better. They're just a different team compared to the Marlins, even if they are both over 10 games over.
Well, now the Orioles are over 20 games over. Yeah. So there was to me, it was clearly they were on different tiers entering this series, and this just solidified that. It's, aside from the Braves, you could say that is the second best team they've played all year. There really aren't very many that are better than the Orioles. And the only thing that they need, they're going to be just like the Marlins. They might be shopping for starting pitching at this deadline. That's really the only vulnerability with this team. We should touch on the fact that the reason why the Marlins struggled in the first and last game is because both Dean Kramer and Kyle Bradish, both of them were outstanding. Like, it seemed like they were really executing their pitches. It wasn't all about the Marlins just floundering there. 2 out of the 3 games, the Orioles just had a really sharp starting pitching performance. That was surprising. They've been winning games even without getting that. And their upside as a team is even better if they're able to acquire an additional starter from outside the organization.
Yeah. They also just recalled Grayson Rodriguez. So let's see how he does.
Yeah. And with the upcoming schedule for the Marlins, they just faced the Orioles, got swept, difficult team. They're not going with the Cardinals, Rockies, Rays, the Tigers, and so forth. Do you think the Marlins can kind of keep the trend of maybe dominating these teams that are under 500 and teams that they should beat? And how do you believe they'll be going towards the deadline in terms of maybe their record? Because again, they're facing the Cardinals, Rockies, Rays, Tigers, and then they'll have one game against the Phillies before the trade deadline. So every team there is under 500 except the Rays and the Phillies. So how do you think they will come into that trade deadline, maybe record-wise?
I mean, you all those series are winnable, except maybe Tampa. Obviously, Tampa's the best team in baseball, and it's hard to see them take those two. But besides that, you should be able to beat every single team that's coming up in the schedule, and they should be in a really good position entering the deadline. Miami also beat Philadelphia. Keep that in mind. So even after the deadline, I think Miami has a good chance to take down Philly. I believe it's here in Miami. I lied. So yeah, they should be heading into good shape. I mean, Miami's shown that something that they didn't do last year. It was beat the good teams. They didn't do that last year. Beat the bad teams. I lied. Dude, they didn't do that last year at all. I'm pretty sure they beat pretty good teams like Houston. I mean, for example, they beat last year, and they weren't able to beat other teams. So besides the Nationals, so this is a good, I guess, trend Miami's found for themselves here.
I think.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I think if they're gonna be buyers at the deadline, they've got 6 games coming up this week that they have to show that they're gonna stay in this race. They have to win this series in St. Louis. They have to handle the Rockies. They have to have that momentum going into the deadline, because if not, I mean, we might see a minor move here or there on the margins just to kind of patch the pitching staff. But if they don't show that, if they don't maintain the momentum that we've seen them build, throughout the season at different points, then obviously, we're going to have a different discussion sort of moving forward. They definitely have to beat up on these teams that, as you said, Kev, that they're supposed to beat, so it'll be interesting to see how they sort of perform over the course of the next week plus, right? Because I think the trade deadline is August 1st. So, we're coming on, like 2 weeks maybe. So, they have to win these games that they're supposed to win, and then, steal a couple that, people don't assume that they will.
Yeah.
He's replacing you today, Isaac. Come on.
And then you look at after the deadline. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it's something to mention. You look at after the deadline, after August 1st, they're going to have series against some of the best teams in baseball. So I think that kind of benefits the Marlins in terms of having those difficult teams after the deadline, being able to have that new player, those new players, because they're going to be facing, they'll be finishing off the Phillies series. Then they'll go at Texas, at Cincinnati, Yankees in Miami, Astros in Miami, to the Dodgers, and then to the Padres. And that'll be almost the entirety of August. So they need to beat on these bad teams and hopefully take one from Tampa Bay. But then after that deadline, after August 1st, most of those teams, if not all of those teams, are over 500. I know the Padres are hovering, but still the Padres still have guys like Juan Soto and Xander Bogaerts.
Oh, let's see if he's a Padre after the deadline.
Let's see, yeah. And then you look at the Rangers are going to be difficult. The Reds are calling up every prospect, and every single one of them is showing out. The Yankees may be last in the division, but again, the Yankees, they could switch it up anytime. Astros just won the World Series, and then you have the Dodgers, Padres, and then the Nationals, who could give the Marlins some trouble.
Do we think Judge is back by the time New York comes down to Miami?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good. I mean, you have that.
I'll be needing like
question.
Yeah, well, he's just one guy. I could tell you from seeing a lot of the Yankees. Yankees are a worse team than the Marlins are right now. There's really no way to spin that a different way. They've been a really mediocre team for an extended period of time. So it is every team plays every team this year. I have not really been as obsessed with this whole schedule conversation as other people, because you play every single team and you play less against your divisional teams than you used to in that process. It's all going to even out. I think everybody is aware that so far the Marlins, their schedule has been skewed on the easier side to this point in the season, and naturally it is going to even out. So this is not really a big surprise to me. But we just agree that they're going to have to be a better team during this later part of the season than they were during the first half. They're not going. They could have, if they have equivalent talent and performance to the first half against superior competition, then their results are not going to be the same. They're going to have to upgrade either by guys just simply playing better than they have to this point, or by acquiring guys from outside the organization, or having the guys that they've promoted internally, like Dane Myers, if he stays hot. If they bring back Yuri before the end of the year and allow him to actually continue being in the rotation down the stretch, those stuff are going to be absolutely critical. That's going to make the difference. And I put up the wild card race just before this to give people a glance how quickly this has tightened up. Look at that. The fact that there are really 5 teams in the wild card race all on top of each other right now. And I don't think you can say emphatically that the Marlins are going to finish ahead of any of those teams. Like there is a scenario where they drop out of this, and there's a scenario where they stay afloat and stay where they are and actually hold on to that spot. It could go either way. The playoff odds kind of reflect that. I think at this moment, their playoff odds is right around 60%. So it's an exciting situation to be in, and to improve those odds, they're either going to have to continue to be very fortunate, or they're going to have to simply get better.
You think the Padres are out of it, Eli?
It's getting really dicey for them.
They lost 2 out of 3 against the
that was a rough last couple of days for the Padres. They are teetering for sure. So yeah, this is, aside from the Marlins just pulling out a lot of close games, the fact that you have these juggernauts coming into the year, or so we thought, in the Padres and the Mets and the Cardinals, the fact that all of them have dropped so much and put themselves in a position where it's going to be extremely difficult for them to get back into the race, like that's been a huge factor in this season. The fact that teams have sunk beneath them, and by default, somebody has to fill in the void. The Marlins have totally seized that opportunity so far.
I think that's also going to complicate the trade market too, right? If so many teams are active and in it, or think that they're in it, it's going to be a lot harder to make some moves, because teams are going to be more teams are going to be buyers or want to be buyers. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out for sure.
Yeah. And then when you look at that schedule, I know we're going back to it, but I think probably the most important part of that is probably the early part. You go to Texas, and then you go Cincinnati. Those are 2 of the most, I would say, the hottest teams right now in baseball. I think that Texas range one is going to be so difficult for the Marlins pitching wise. That's a game where they can easily give up 10 runs each game. The Rangers are the highest scoring team in baseball. I think that's going to be really difficult over there in Globe Life. And then you go to Cincinnati, again with Ellie De La Cruz, Matt McClain, and a team that's fighting for a wild card spot. The Reds just would have to take 2 out of 3 to just make up that ground against the Marlins. So I believe that stretch of Rangers, Cincinnati is probably going to be the really one to look at for the Marlins if they really do believe they're going to be a playoff contender.
That West Coast trip too is going to be huge.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you look at that, and I think that's really what's gonna. I think that's, you look at it and you're like, you have to beat the Dodgers to gain more ground in the NL, more than you already have, just to stick to that first wild card spot, and then you have obviously San Diego, which should be a team you should take 2 out of 3 against. So I look at that series, but I mean, you said it, Danny. Texas and Cincinnati. Has Cincinnati still scored a run since the All-Star break? Or have
they did score a few runs yesterday, but it was a deflating loss for them. They still looked. I watched the game live, and they blew a late lead. They're another talented but inexperienced team as well, where sometimes they lose games that they should win because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can move on. Eli, you mentioned Eddie Cabrera, him ramping up to starting again. Kevin, what have you seen from Eddie to expect him against the Cards compared to maybe last time we did see him?
Is it him tomorrow? No.
Well, we'll have to find out for sure, depending on weather permitting. But he is. That's why the Marlins have listed haven't announced their starter, because he's on the IL. They can't formally show him until they bring him back. But he is expected back from his shoulder thing that kept him out for over a month.
Yeah, I think these are going to be very crucial starts for Eddie, given just the state of the rotation right now. You kind of want to see who's going to really stick there. Obviously, Eddie's had some starts where he's looked phenomenal. There's just no other way to say it. Obviously, it's against Kansas City and Oakland, but those are the 2 that stand out. And then just besides that, you really need to see how he looks coming back from, because maybe he's doesn't look good. Maybe he's really inconsistent, and there's times where he does look good, times where he doesn't. He's kind of walking too many guys, which has been a big issue for Eddie this year. Maybe you could throw him in the bullpen and look for that another starter, but really you have to start deciding. Really, this is going to be these next starts are going to be huge for Eddie. I think he has a chance to really get to this Cardinals team, a really underperforming Cardinals team, as we mentioned, but they have some really good pieces on that team. So we'll have to see how he performs and if he could really hold down the Cardinals. I mean, was that the team that was the team that Miami walked off in the craziest fashion. They lost one here again too. So I mean, we'll see how it goes. I think how have the Cardinals been lately? I know they heated up for a little bit and then they kind of cooled back down. I believe that was the case, but we'll see. Eddie really needs to tighten up for these next couple starts just to see if he has a chance to keep that rotation spot.
Yeah.
Listen, if Cabrera doesn't do what the team needs him to do, the team is going to be in a much bigger issue from a pitching perspective, because right now, I mean, they're just running out of arms. I mean, there are too many guys on the IL. If he doesn't perform, they don't have anybody else to turn to. I mean, guys like it's
I just saw
that. The Messi storm has made its way up here, I guess. I don't know. But, I mean, guys like Chichi Gonzalez, who you thought maybe could have filled some innings. I mean, he hasn't been anything up here in Jacksonville. I mean, they don't have any other arms at this point. So if he doesn't perform, they're in a much bigger issue.
Yeah. Let me pose this question to everyone. We're talking about the trade deadline and everything. The Marlins needing bats, but could we see the Marlins trading? You mentioned starting pitcher. Could they trade for two, maybe starting pitchers? Is that something that Marlins would need? Maybe if Eddie Cabrera doesn't really pan out, that we think him coming back and them going to Cueto. Are the Marlins in a position where they can trade for multiple starting pitchers at the deadline?
No.
They don't have the assets for that. Yeah. For some of these high profile rentals, just looking at rentals, some of these rentals, you're talking about giving up one of your very best prospects from this farm system just to get them, just because this farm system doesn't have very many blue chip guys in order to make those deals. When we were talking about, I guess we could get into Jordan Montgomery a little bit, for example. He's a very good pitcher. He's a solid 3 in a lot of rotations. But just to get him, they would probably have to give up one of their like a Jake Eater type, one of their better pitching prospects, just to rent a guy that they don't even have a chance of keeping beyond this year. That's how thin the farm system is.
Isn't he a rental? I think it's another year after that.
No, Jordan Montgomery is a pending free agent. One that talking about him. Yeah, him, whether it's Lucas Giolito, who's probably even more expensive when the White Sox make him available. And Kevin went into Marcus Stroman. I think Marcus Stroman is even beyond their affordability because you probably need multiple decent prospects in order to make that deal done, considering that he's pitching at a Cy Young candidate level. So they're going to have to go down the list just to make deals without mortgaging their whole future. That's to get one guy. So I'm fully on board with them making that kind of big investment in order to shore things up, both for the rest of this regular season and as a guy that could hopefully pitch games for them in October when they get there. But 2, I think, is asking too much. That's why Edward is such a big X factor for this team. They need him to stay available. The most important thing is for him to just be available.
Yeah.
But they need him to just be more efficient as well, for him to work deep into his games. The results, I think even the run prevention is less important than the volume. The volume is what they really need right now. They need decent volume because the backup plan, if it doesn't work out, is you're like in a position where you either pick up the freshest arm from AAA, the Chichi Gonzalez and the Devin Smeltzer, or you're in a position where Jeff Lindgren, or you're eventually you cross off enough names and they're going to get Johnny Cueto making spot starts. That's eventually in the line here if their other guys don't stay healthy and don't give volume. Edward is such an important piece, and he's coming back at such a key time so that they can see a couple starts from him before having to make that decision on the trade market.
And we need to see how much longer Trevor's going to be out for, because down the line he would be a nice piece to finally have back because of how long he's been out for. I don't think we still have an injury report yet, but once we do, we'll find out if he actually threw.
I
Because
don't
I
think
know the last
I don't
one he
think
hadn't
Anthony's
thrown.
throwing yet.
Right. He's still He's still at least a month away. Unfortunately, if he hasn't even started building up yet. I did want to touch on Jack Flaherty, where that's another rental, somebody that I think would be more attainable without giving up a huge prospect in return. He's been better lately. I'm not personally super excited by him. I don't feel like he's really been the same guy since all his injuries struck. But that is somebody that certainly would be an improvement over their current options. And when you talk about this Cardinals team, I guess we could, on the other side of the break, we could get into it. The fact that the Cardinals have now leaned all the way into selling very transparently, the fact that they're going to be sellers. There are these two teams do line up pretty well when it comes to trade possibilities.
And lastly, before we get into the break, we mentioned guys calling up. We mentioned Chi-Chi, Devin Smeltzer. Is there a possibility that the Marlins could bring up Patrick Monteverde? He is on the older side. I believe he's 25, 26 years old. He did have a good showing at the Futures game. He's getting up there. Is that someone that the Marlins could potentially bring, a spot start or anything like that, where if they have to, they could bring up Monteverde? Is that even a thought that the Marlins could do?
I love Monteverde, but at this point, they would have brought him up already. I mean, they obviously they need it. You know that, and I mean, at this point, the best thing you could do is put him in AAA, give him that, I guess, some more level of competition, and see if you could trade him. That's the most likely option right now, the most realistic one. Or you say, as you said, Danny, let's bring him to the big leagues, give him a showcase, see if he kind of succeeds up there. If he does, obviously, the trade value goes up, and a team's going to want to bite, and that's probably another option. But I just don't see it happening. Miami's had you could have brought him up a while ago, and they just haven't.
We've seen them call up from AA before, and they seem to trust the pitching staff, or at least the coaching staff rather, down there or over there in Pensacola, because they have Yuri there, right? So I mean, would it be a shock that they called him up? No, but I think the first domino to fall would be Cabrera really struggling or getting hurt again, where they're desperate for another arm. And then, I mean, the guys that they have in Jacksonville, there's nobody really to pick from. Like,
there's
that's
literally nobody.
to be meaningful. I mean, Monteverde would be interesting. If they struggled, he might get a call later down the line just to see, what he has and whatnot. But, I think Cabrera is how he does is probably going to dictate what ultimately happens with Monteverde moving forward this season.
And we were talking to Eric Bramer this season, I think Eli and I a while back, and he did mention organizations come to watch Monteverde. So would love to see who really bites on someone like him. And I think he's going to be Miami's top pitching trade asset this trade deadline.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and go to the break. And then after the break, we're going to start off this series between the Marlins and the Cardinals and see if they do play it. If not, it might be rained out. So potential doubleheader tomorrow. And then we'll go a little bit more into trade targets and talk about maybe what the Cardinals have to potentially offer the Marlins. So stay tuned. We are back here on FOF Live, presented by La Pop. That's LAPOP. You could check them Instagram and their route location. But let's start off and talk about this series between the Marlins and the Cardinals. They did previously play at Lone Depot Park earlier in the season, where the Marlins did take that series handedly. The Cardinals, like Eli mentioned, are looking like they will be sellers at the deadline, but don't expect maybe guys like Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt to be traded. But most likely their pitching staff of Jack Flaherty, Jordan Montgomery, and some bats, including maybe Alec Burleson and Brendan Donovan. Kevin, talk to me about these Cardinals, what you expect, and maybe players that intrigue you?
I mean, this is a really good team that's just underperformed. There's no other way to put it. And their big need of pitching has finally been exposed. You can't rely off of Adam Wainwright, who's I think 40 years old, or whoever, Miles Michaelis to carry your rotation. And I was looking at some of the quotes today. They are really expecting big things from Dakota Hudson. They haven't gotten any big things from Dakota Hudson. It's been a really big issue for the Cardinals this year, and that's been the big issue. And obviously, Eli's been mentioning that Miami and Arizona and St. Louis line up perfectly when it comes to trade talks, and they do. Miami has a couple pitchers they could give over to the Cardinals, while the Cardinals have some bats that Miami could give up to Miami to the other side. So makes a lot of sense. I know Daniel really likes Lars Nootbaar, as so do I. I think it's Tyler O'Neill, Dylan Carlson. Those are the names to really be looking at if you're Miami. And Tyler O'Neill could also play some infield, so it makes a lot of sense. And then obviously on the pitching end, it's mainly Jack Flaherty and Jordan Montgomery. I think those are the two names we'll be hearing. And I know Grant mentioned, or Eli actually, well, both of you I think mentioned Ryan Hellesley in your articles. So another name to keep an eye out there for, who's been pretty good for the Cardinals. So
mentioning the Cardinals, you look recently, I believe it was today or yesterday, they DFA'd Genesis Cabrera.
Not today. No.
That was today.
Kev,
what do you think of Genesis Cabrera or Eli David? I don't want to say as a pickup for the Marlins.
No.
But what did you see there from the Cardinals in terms of maybe letting him go? Because I believe he's been there forever. He's been there for a long time within the Cardinals organization.
I think they're just working on a trade for him. They DFA'd him, so they have the next week or so to find a match for him. In the meantime, they signed Ryan Tepera to fill his spot as a rental. So it's there's really not much going on there. He's been intriguing earlier portions of his career, but like many of their other players this year, he's not pitching particularly well right now. The Marlins have needs in their bullpen, but in my opinion, it's just for right-handed relievers. They're all set on lefties between Puck and Tanner Scott and Steven Okert. And when Andrew Nardi gets back, and Nardi is progressing towards return, hopefully within about 2 weeks or so. So they are, that's not a fit. There are many fits that the Cardinals could have trade-wise, but I don't think Genesis Cabrera is one of them.
No, I wouldn't mind though if we're talking about trades between the Marlins and the Cardinals have a high leverage righty in their bullpen, Jordan Hicks, and he's got like the triple digit sinker. I mean, he's been really good since taking over as their closer. I mean, if they're selling a guy like that, I find like somebody like him would be really interesting. And for me personally, I'd love to have Jordan Hicks on the Marlins because he actually has type 1 diabetes. And, you don't see Adam Duvall had it with, and I have type 1 diabetes. So there's like that connection for me personally. But still, a guy like Jordan Hicks would be, I think, a nice high leverage arm, a righty for the Marlins to have at the back end of their bullpen.
Yeah. I want to ask Eli, in terms of the Marlins, let's say, do potentially make a trade with the Cardinals, would you be more in favor of them trading for a reliever, a bat, or a starting pitcher out of their roster?
Well, I think some people know how I feel about relievers. That even though there are some, as I touched on, some right-handers, some very particular guys that I think are good enough. Most of them just don't move the needle as much as other positions. If you're comparing them to everyday players or starting pitchers, to me, starting pitcher is the priority. And I could see both Flaherty and Montgomery being options depending on what the price is and what other alternatives are out there on the market for the Marlins to consider there on this Cardinals roster. I think those guys would be, to me, the ones I'd be focused on most. On the position player side, they've other guys that would help the Marlins a lot. Brendan Donovan is perhaps my favorite one in the fact that last year won a Gold Glove while playing a lot of third base. He won the utility Gold Glove, but he was third base was his primary position. He's obviously not playing very much there right now this year because of Nolan Arenado being in the way. But the fact that he is so versatile, but also gets on base at a really high level, I think with this Marlins team, and the fact that he is under club control for so many years as well, that'd be a pretty big price, but that'd be buying somebody that helps both now and for the long term. On this Marlins team, it's really is hard to find like a bat that fits seamlessly with the guys they currently have. But if it is going to be somebody, ideally it'd be somebody that plays the left side of the infield or is available to play, because that's the side where they're just not getting any power from Segura or Wendell or Birdie. Donovan has a little bit more than them, though not a ton, but a little bit more. So between his versatility and the fact that they'll have him, he could be a piece that they can move around in the coming years, basically to whatever position is their biggest current need. That's somebody that I'd be willing to put together a very big deal for. I don't know if that's going to happen during the year. I think it's those rental starting pitchers. Those are the ones where they're going to be moved. And because of that, perhaps you get into a staring contest and ultimately you get it done without giving up too much in return. That's the easiest fit. But moving into more likely the offseason is when hopefully you try to get something done with their bigger bets. Where if you're in a situation where Soler leaves this team and you suddenly have more room to play around within the outfield and in the DH spot, that's when you can get into some really creative possibilities with Lars Nootbaar, with even with Dylan Carlson. For the moment, I feel like their outfield is mostly set as long as Jazz comes back. But once there's really time to sit down and hammer out these things, I think you'd see a bigger deal potentially come together in the offseason with the Marlins getting one of their Cardinals main hitters and sending back an arm in return. For the moment, I think the focus would just be on those rental starters and on the relievers like Hicks. I could see Hicks as well. I'm not a huge fan of that one, just due to in my opinion, the near certainty that he's going to go out into free agency, that somebody's going to overpay for him just because of the velocity and because he's still relatively young. He's not on the top of my list, but I think these teams are going to be talking pretty heavily with each other.
Could you see them making a move for a guy like Paul DeJong if they end up if the Cardinals move off him?
That's another one where I do value the fact that he brings a little more power to the left side of the infield that they don't currently have with him. And he is playing obviously a lot better than he had been the previous few years. When they sent him down to the minors for quite a bit of, I think he was even in the minors for a bit of this year before things really settled down. That is one where
could be a buy low situation. Who knows?
Yeah, that's something to look at. He's playing really well lately. I had not realized that recently he's been probably hitting as consistently as he has in a while. 5-game hitting streak at the moment, but for the whole month of, really going back for this period of time, he would be something of an upgrade. Yeah, I mean, that's somebody that I would look into as well. Sure.
And with all these players we're mentioning, DeJong, Donovan, Flattery, Montgomery, they're going to need a price. Their players are going to be needed to go back to be able to make these trades. And my question for all three of you is, what would the Marlins have to give up to get these players? Because we're not talking about a top farm system. You're going to have to give up multiple guys. Could we see guys like Eater, Max, Watson? What are the Marlins going to have to give up potentially to even get one of these guys?
Eater. I think Eater would
probably depends on who they're targeting, right? I mean, if it's
that too.
If it's a guy like, I don't know, Kenyon Middleton from the Chicago White Sox, who could probably help in the bullpen. I mean, he's going to come or should come relatively cheaply, right? I don't know, but beyond that, like if you're looking at a guy, I mean, somebody like Paul Blackburn from Oakland might be somebody to look at, because they have that history with Oakland, and he would be somebody who could eat some innings. Maybe he costs a higher level prospect. But yeah, I mean, like you said, that it's a shallow minor league system, so that unfortunately the prospects, the prospect capital isn't there as it has been maybe in years past.
I think for a rental like Jordan Montgomery, I think that's where you're going to have to pay the high price. I think he's going to be one of the most sought-out pitchers on the market. You see Giolito, Stroman, and you have Jordan Montgomery right next to them, in that tier. And I think I put a trade where Miami gives up Carson Milburn and Yidi Cape for Jordan Montgomery. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of not just Montgomery. I think that's when you kind of look, that's going to be a higher price for someone like Lucas Giolito, who's having a really good season. I think it would be even higher for someone like Marcus Stroman. So it just shows you how desperate teams are to acquire a starting pitcher that's going to be not come back to your team most likely next season. So, It's going to be high price.
And we're mentioning guys who are probably on the higher end of these, trade packages. You mentioned Mark Stroman, Giolito, Montgomery. Could we see the Marlins maybe potentially going for these lower veteran guys? Maybe a guy like maybe Michael Lorenzen, who've gotten some pretty lucky this year. I know James Paxton, but the Red Sox are looking good. Can you see the Marlins maybe trading for just a lower, maybe a guy in the lower tier compared to these high-valued rentals like Stroman and Montgomery?
I don't know if this really applies to your question, but the name that John Morosi floated today on the Guardians was Aaron Savali being potentially available.
That's a good
to them.
one.
I don't know exactly where he fits in because he has 2 more years of control beyond this year at a relatively low salary that he's starting off with this season. And he's actually pitching really well. I had not noticed that he has a mid-2s ERA in a partial season so far this year. Yeah, the underlying stuff tells you that he's more of a number 3 or probably a number 4 starter, and yet that's not all that far below some of these other bigger names that we're talking about. So I'd be curious to see exactly how that goes. I think that's a name that is going to wait until the very end of the deadline because the Guardians themselves, they're probably, I don't think they can afford to trade him and actually stay in the race. I think that they would kind of have to reach a point where they're firmly in the selling camp before making a move like that with Savali. And I think because of his years of control and because of how low his salary is, that's a guy that I think the Marlins would probably have to give up just as much for him as they would with some of these other bigger names. So that's just a new one that I hadn't thought of prior to today, where he's just he's a pretty safe arm. I think even when things go really badly for him, he's going to have a place in your rotation. He throws enough strikes. He gets enough soft contact that he'd be yet another guy that is an improvement over the current void that they have right now.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing about this deadline. I mean, you said it, Eli. They still may be in it despite a really shitty record. That's how it works. I think they have a pretty bad record last time I checked.
Well, the AL Central's a mess.
Exactly.
The top team there is under 500, I believe.
Exactly. The AL Central and the NL Central, and all those teams believe they're still in it. Besides, I think Pittsburgh and whoever the last place team is in the NL Central.
The Cardinals.
The Cardinals. Yeah.
Cardinals are the last place team there.
It's at this point it's a three-way race. You have Chicago, the Cubs, Brewers, and Reds. And
even
Chicago's
the Cubs are kind of potentially a little out of it. I believe they're 10 games out of 500. I think it's probably maybe the Brewers and the Reds to take it. I probably the Brewers. They're 10 games over, and they look like everything's being put together with them now. With Christian Yelich having now almost a comeback first half to his season. I think probably the Brewers are really putting it together now, and the Reds potentially coming close to the Marlins in terms of getting the wild card spot. But I think with that, it's a great time to go ahead and talk about lineups for this game, the pitching matchups, because that is what we're here to discuss, this series between the Marlins and the Cardinals. So last series against the Orioles did not fare well for the Marlins, and I can imagine there was a lot of red and a lot of blue for the Fish. Again, with the Cardinals, you have to take every game one by one. And here, again, it's a lot of players on their own are just, you could say kind of like fantastic. You could Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, Jordan Walker, their top prospect, having, a really great, I would say half after getting called down to AAA. Kevin, what do you see from the Cardinals, and maybe who do you think maybe standing out to you, and why is it Jose Firmino?
One through 5 is really scary, very, very scary. And then you have my boy Ivan Herrera, who I think that was my first trade article. He's there, so we'll see. He's getting his value up. Hopefully, I haven't checked the numbers yet in the major leagues, but hopefully he's getting his value up so Miami could eventually trade for him. But yeah, this is a good Cardinals lineup. I mean, despite how bad they've been this season, it's a good lineup. You have Jordan Walker, who's quietly having one of the best seasons out of all the rookies, and he definitely is going to get some NL Rookie of the Year love, at least some votes in there. And obviously, Wilson Contreras has been underperforming this season. He's kind of back to his career norms. And then obviously, Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, the top 2 players on that team, and some of the best players in baseball. So definitely a big challenge for Luzardo tonight. And then your pitcher is Mr. Miles Michaelis, who dominated Miami. I think he went 7 innings last time against Miami, and he was really damn good. He was really freaking good. There's just no other way to put it. And well, yeah, I think it's a good lineup, and Miami has their work cut out for them tonight. And Luzardo hopefully shows against this team.
Yeah, and with this, I also have to mention you have Dylan Carlson there, Tommy Edman on the IL. So that's why you see games like Dylan Carlson, Tyler O'Neill, again, been injured the whole year. So really different names there for the Cardinals. Eli, I want you to talk to me about Wilson Contreras. What has happened to him this season, maybe, that the Cardinals are putting him in DH? I see a lot of ups and downs with him. Is that a guy that could potentially give the Marlins trouble? Because I believe in the series before, he had a home run. He was really standout performance against that series.
Yeah, he's been red hot lately. He's finally sort of rounding into form, the kind of play that they thought he would be. You look up and now his hitting stats this year they're still down significantly from last year, but overall just still well above average for a catcher. And then the complication is that he's not catching quite as much as they envisioned. He's been the primary catcher so far, but this is going to be his 20th game at DH. So that is pretty significant for a guy that is still presumably in his athletic prime in his age 31 season in the very first year of a 5-year deal. I think they were hoping that they wouldn't be using him, keeping him at DH that much and clogging up where they could use some of their other younger bats that they'd like to. So it hasn't gone the way he wanted to. He was obviously involved in that big drama earlier in the year where there was a lot of finger pointing from the pitchers towards him about who is really responsible for the fact that their pitching staff has underperformed. And yeah, defensively, he has not been good when he has been out there. In terms of calling games, he's been fine at controlling the running game. That's the one thing he continues to do really well, is that it's hard to run on him. And aside from that, though, he just hasn't moved the needle the way that they thought he would. He has not been the prime Molina type of player that they thought they were paying that money for. So he's been the scapegoat at times this year for their struggles, especially on the pitching side. But now that his bat has come along, I don't think they're going to do anything big to panic with him. I don't think he's going to be one of the many players that's available at this deadline for them. They'll ride it out, and they'll hope that he finishes the second half strong for them at this moment. But he should be playing. We'll see. If this game, there's a rainout and there's a doubleheader, the Marlins could dodge a bullet and maybe he sits one of those games. That'd be pretty fortunate to get his bat out of the lineup for one half of a doubleheader. We'll see if it plans out that way. Just to echo what Kevin said, there are some great hitters in this lineup. With Jordan Walker, as good as he's been offensively, I disagree with Kevin's comment about him getting Rookie of the Year love. I don't think he's going to get any love because it's a really strong rate. No, he is well behind Corbin Carroll and Ellie.
I think he'll get a vote. He'll get a couple votes.
And I think even behind Kodai Senga of the Mets, who has been just heating up as the season has gone along. Yeah, with Walker, the issue is that defensively, he is a catastrophe in the outfield. He's maybe really the worst defensive outfielder in baseball, which is stunning for somebody that is so young, but it's because he's not an outfielder, because this is so new to him. And I think you saw it even during this previous series between these teams. There were balls that it felt like he should have cut off that he wasn't able to get to. He was making strange decisions in terms of what base that he's throwing to. He makes all these really, really subtle mistakes that add up and accumulate. Just as much as the pitching has been disappointing for this Cardinals team, it's the defense has been almost equally disappointing from a variety of these players. And that has negated all the value that they get from their bats, is that they just do not prevent runs at an acceptable level.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we go ahead and look at this Marlins lineup, who will be facing Miles Michaelis against the Cardinals. Again, Maurice Arias, Jorge Soler, Cooper. So it's the same from the Marlins. Kevin, I want you to talk to me about Alex Carver's favorite player, Gene Segura, especially what he's been doing as of late.
Yeah, I think Skip mentioned this to me. No, he did mention this to me. I think it was the Sunday right before the All-Star break. He said that hits are finally falling, and it's true. Hits are finally falling for Gene Segura. I mean, It hasn't been a strikeout issue. He's striking out at a very low rate. He's putting the ball in play, but it's just luck. And he's finally getting it going. It's nice to see Gene really get it going. And I think we mentioned this on the spaces that if Gene Segura could finally get this consistent rhythm, you're adding a big piece to this team. That's kind of like an internal addition to this deadline. Gene Segura's bat, which was really good in the second half of the season last year for Philly and in the playoffs. And it's finally nice to also have a good hitter at the bottom of the lineup, because for the most part this season, that bottom of the lineup has been kind of murky. Although yesterday, I think they were the ones who got that rally started there in the ninth inning. But yeah, nice to have him going. Dane Myers back now at the bottom of that lineup. I think really the big issue is that catching position. You have Fortes and Stallings who are basically hitting about the same. So yeah, very nice to see Gene Segura not only get it off going offensively, he's played pretty good at third base for the most part. So I am very impressed with what we've seen with Gene Segura, not only this month of July, but even kind of midway through June. He finally got it going around that Seattle series. He's been hitting over 300, since then. So nice to see Gene get it going.
Yeah. So, Eli, with Gene, are your worries gone about Segura coming in before July, or are you still worried about him?
Oh, it's not that I'm worried about him. I've just accepted that he's not an everyday player. Like he's fine. Things have evened out for him. He's certainly better than he showed early on. His luck has evened out on that side of the ball. I still don't like his defense overall, and there's still such an absence of over the fence power, and still too many ground balls overall as well, where he brings skills to the table. It's just that as an everyday third baseman, he's one of the weaker options that you have in the majors. So they should continue, in my opinion, to explore options to get help at third base from outside the organization. And then potentially, the alternative is that if Dane Myers continues to absolutely rake heading up to the trade deadline and you feel like there's no reason to send him down, then he should be somebody that eats into that playing time at third base. He has some experience there. His defense is not any better at third than Segura's is, but offensively, certainly a much higher ceiling with Dane than Segura. So he's going to be on this team. I think any conversations we were having early in the year about him not even making it through the years in Marlin, those have gone away. So they've averted a worst case scenario, but they shouldn't, just be complacent about this. He's still somebody that should not be overexposed, over-reliance. He shouldn't be in the lineup every single day. Otherwise, I think you're going to see the offense is still going to be not good enough to get over the hump. So as long as they're willing to be flexible with his role when a couple more of their bats get healthy, then I think he could still be a sort of interesting part of this team overall.
Yeah. And moving on to Segura, this could be our last topic before predictions. We have yet to mention Luzardo and him going up against the Cardinals. How do you think he will fare? And maybe how do you maybe take Luzardo's last start and try to see what he could do against the Cardinals compared to the last one?
I mean, Luzardo, he's going to have to eat some innings for this team. I mean, just like unrelated to any of his previous performances, he needs to be available and pitch really well. And it's just it's the further development of what we've seen, a good young pitcher, right? I mean, he needs to continue to be consistent and I mean, he's going to get strikeouts, but there's a lot of red on that side of the screen for the Cardinals. So this is not an easy lineup, and he's pitching on the road. He's going to give up some runs. I mean, he has given up a few homers, right? So I mean, we may see a couple get up over the fence, but he's somebody that needs to continue to sort of be a stabling force in this pitching rotation, because the starters have been so unstable throughout the season, and the bullpen is in shambles at this point, that they need Luzardo to pitch really well tonight and obviously moving forward.
Yeah, Luzardo's last start against the Cardinals on July 4th, went 6 innings, 0 earned runs, a high of 8 strikeouts there. Kevin, what do you want to see from Luzardo this time facing the Cardinals over there at their stadium compared to his performance on July 4th?
Just repeat it. Repeat what you did last time. I think that's going to be key for him. He's been pretty consistent his last starts. I mean, 8 strikeouts, 9 strikeouts. He's been performing very well. He's been giving you length. I would love to see him go to 7th inning. I think that's been not only a big thing with him, but with guys like Braxton, obviously, and then others in the rotation. So I think the big thing for me, I would love to see him go that 7th inning.
Yeah. So I think, Eli, with that is a perfect time to go into predictions. So, Eli, let's get that video.
This is prediction time.
It's time.
All right, and of course, with prediction time, here you will give us your prediction on the series. Could be the Marlins, could be the Cardinals. It is 3 games, so 2-1 either side, or it could be a sweep. And your MVP could be from either team. Could be a hitter or a pitcher. And your series prediction does not have to correlate with the MVP. So you could pick the Marlins and pick a Cardinals MVP if you would like. As here we're looking at some of our super subscribers and their predictions. Starting off with Devin, going with Dane Myers, which might be a popular MVP choice among this panel here. Luis Arias, Segura. So it looks like everyone here is really looking at the Marlins to take this series, except
most people. It's funny when you look at these throughout the season, you see patterns. You see guys and women that have they lean a certain way in terms of their confidence level. With MDV, with Marcelo DeVivo, he almost always picks against the Marlins in these. And then on the other side, you have David Tobin. He almost always picks the Marlins to sweep every single series. Yeah. And David submitted his prediction ahead of time too, but I hid it from here so that he could give us some more drama with his unveiling. But
there's Gorman even starting? He's not starting, right? He's not playing today.
He's not playing today for sure. So we'll see how that looks. He's not in the lineup today, and but aside from that, I think most of these picks are defensible. So we'll see the way it goes. I'm not the
leaderboard if possible.
I'll have to see if I can find it. We do have a 3-way tie at the top of the leaderboard among super subscribers who have all outperformed us. Here it is, with Romeo, William Garcia, Eric Bolaños, all the top 3 spots.
All right, and 3 points separating me to number 1 or 8th place between first. So, if anyone here, Kevin, where are you at? You said
I'm 12.
Oh, right there with Eli. I mean, you guys.
I was literally at the top. I was at the top, man.
I think now, perfect time talk about predictions. Eli, you have the music. Oh, and of course, leading off this prediction, Kevin Barra.
I'm gonna go Marlins sweep. Feeling good about the offense. And I'm going to go with Luis Arias as the series MVP.
All right. David.
I think the offense is going to show up just like Kevin said. I think the Marlins are going to take 2 out of 3, and I'm going to have Brian De La Cruz as my MVP.
Ooh. All right. I'll go myself. I think the Marlins take 2 out of 3. Would like a sweep, but I think it's more realistic the Marlins take 2 out of these 3 games. And my MVP is right behind me. No, not John Jay. Dane Myers is going to be my MVP for the series. Eli.
And I am surprisingly confident in this Marlins team. I think the Cardinals, people don't get through their heads like how this team is so flawed. And the Marlins, they took advantage of it a couple weeks ago. I think they do the same thing here, winning 2 out of 3 games. And Jesus Sanchez is going to be my series MVP. We're going to see a lot of slugging from Sanchez over these 3 games in St. Louis.
All right, those are our predictions for this series between the Miami Marlins and the St. Louis Cardinals. As always, this is FOF Live presented by LaPop, LAPOP. I'm Daniel for Kevin, for Eli, for David. This is FOF Live. As always, go fish.